Hi, I'm Marty Mix, and I just wanted to um, introduce our topic here. It's firearms in Minnesota. We actually started this originally in 2019. I've been this Firearms Study Committee co-chair, and along with Mary Lewis Grow. And now I have to figure out, I'm not happy that I'm suddenly having to, oh, here, let me just go with this. I have a wireless mouse in this. So welcome to January Jumpstart. This is our major goals are to help orient League members to their roles and how to access and use League of Women Voter US and League of Women Voters Minnesota resources. For this study for firearms, we only have the resources at the Minnesota site, and you can find all the information at member resources. And how do you get to member resources? On the top band of the State League website, you will find a thing, Local League, and just click on that. And the bottom option to click on is member resources. And when you click on that, it will be the first thing you see. There'll be 5 different items. You'll find the PowerPoint that I'm going to be using. You'll find the actual report, which is longer, and then there'll be a leader's guide so that you'll know how to start the meeting. And just to remind everyone that this is a nonpartisan organization and that we do not support or oppose political parties or candidates. So we don't really want anything when we're talking about firearms to relate to the political parties, because it's a matter of whether people are supporting some further restrictions on possession of firearms, or whether they are not in favor of, they want to make firearms more easily possessed by more people. Some states now want to go with be able to carry a firearm without a permit. So, we've got a large expanse of views on firearms in this country and in Minnesota. And I think the rest is, we want to encourage regular networking. And, if there's a league nearby that's going to be having a meeting on firearms, please you can work together on that. And of course, this consensus process, we're at a local league level when we're holding our meetings. And this particular study is a statewide study. So we're looking to see whatever we decide. This then would give us the ability to lobby at the state level on any new firearm positions. And of course, on our current positions. We have current positions on firearms that we are keeping. Now, what we did change, and we have written it a little differently than the State League has in their program for action. In the red parts, in the red part of our printing, this is what was changed in 2022 at the State League Council. And you'll notice that we've included ghost guns as a definition, it included in the category of firearms. Currently, ghost guns are guns that are made from unfinished receivers or frames. And because of that, they are not given a serial number. Once they're finished, they are considered firearms currently. We would like to see unfinished frames and receivers as considered as firearms, because they are within an hour or 2 at the most able to be a fully functional firearm. It's just you need a few drill parts and just putting the rest of your gun together. It doesn't take very long. The other one is that we support licensing firearms purchasers or transferees. And the previous position we had was we wanted to license the firearms. When my co-chair, Mary Lewis Grow, looked at our positions, she said, oh my goodness, that was a mistake. It should have always said licensing firearms purchasers, because she said you don't license firearms, you register firearms and license the purchaser. So that's a wording change that we made that brought it back to the original. The next one, universal, we added to background check. Universal background check means that background checks for all purchases and transferees would be required. That was the intent of the original State League committee and State League members. But when the Brady Act was passed in 1993, it only applied to the sale of firearms by federally licensed dealers. It didn't apply to, they didn't even think about people selling guns at gun shows. They weren't even considering the number of transfers of guns, of people sharing guns with friends and such. So the rest, we do have a ban. Our old position and everything in black was our old positions. And I do not like this. My wireless mouse, it's too sensitive. So we'll be doing this consensus hopefully by February 17th, but we're going to be a little flexible for those leagues that need a little more time. And after we get all the data of the responses tabulated, and we have a new position statement, we would submit that to the board. The board can approve that, but then it actually is finally approved by the members at convention. Let's see. And then this is an overview of firearm deaths. And you can see that in 2020, the murder rate went up significantly from 2013. We had a period from 2010 to 2013 or 14 where our firearms deaths were very low in Minnesota, and actually the rest of the country was experiencing much lower homicide rates. Big cities were considered safer. Things like New York City were very safe. And then things started turning around after COVID and the killing of George Floyd, which eroded trust in the police and the legal system. The suicides you can see there it has gone up a little tiny bit. In Minnesota, it actually was going down a little bit in the numbers that committed suicide. I don't have the current data. So since 2020, we don't know exactly what happened. Or at least I don't know. It might be somewhere on the Department of Health website. So when we started, this is the PowerPoint that you can use if you want to just have a simple presentation. You don't really have to do anything yourself. This is all ready made for you, where we talk about, the changes from 1990 to today. And back in 1990, I should go back to here it is. Back in 1990, we had 35,000 gun deaths per year. They have gone up. Surprisingly, the gun death rates, or the rates of gun deaths, has not exceeded the 1995 gun death rate. But we're up there, and it's very concerning. The Second Amendment was applied to state militias at that time. For a well-regulated militia, that was kind of the basis of the Second Amendment, so that you wouldn't be controlled by a large government that, like what the colonists had with the King's Army. And then there are very few private assault rifles, very few permits to carry. Gun casualties exceeded by traffic deaths. And now we've had changes in state and federal laws that apply the Second Amendment to individual rights to carry, not to carry, rights to have to possess a firearm. But it's not an absolute right. They allow for certain restrictions, at least the previous Heller decision did. And we've had a rise in threat from domestic armed militias. There's been an increase in mass shootings, whether you're looking at it from the FBI definition or the gun violence archive definition. There has been an increase. But as I'm getting ahead of myself. And guns are more versatile, accurate, deadly, and cheaper. So, you know, the idea that you can put a auto sears on a gun because of the interchangeable parts, you know, interchangeable parts are becoming more part of guns now, which means that they can be adapted to a lot of different uses. And currently, you know, we now have 43,500 some gun deaths as compared to the 35,000. But again, the rate is not higher. Firearms were used in 75% of the homicides in Minnesota this last year. And there is no one definition of a mass shooting. If we compare the FBI definition of a mass shooting, we had last year 60 mass shootings. If we look at the definition by Gun Violence Archive, we had 611 mass shootings. So what's the difference between the two? The FBI looks at a mass shooting as 4 shot, excluding the killer, and that's the same for the Gun Violence Archive. The difference is the FBI looks at a mass shooting as something that occurs outside the home, that occurs in a public place, such as a shopping mall, a place of employment, schools, any places where a mass shooter wants to go where they can kill more people, churches, that kind of thing. Whereas Gun Violence Archive considers a mass shooting of in the home, the domestic cases. FBI does not include domestic mass shootings. So if cousin goes to the barbecue and shoots up everybody, that's not included in an FBI definition. It's included with the Gun Violence Archive. So, and the FBI doesn't consider mass shootings that are criminally or gang related. So you can see that that excludes a lot of potential mass shootings. So that's the difference between 60 and 611. So yes, most of our mass shootings are actually domestic, gang related, or involved with a criminal kind of trade that they're involved in. You know, when I was researching, like Rochester and Austin had some mass shootings, and it was related to drugs in both cases, where they did a home invasion and shot people. Actually, theirs were not mass shootings. I take that back. They were just shootings where 3 people were killed, which was a, you know, surprise, because those cities don't have, you know, high homicide rates. Okay, so the changes in the Constitution, I talked a little bit about them, about the Heller decision, establishing the individual right to bear arms, but not an absolute right. It did acknowledge that there are certain persons that should not possess a gun because they could be a danger to others. McDonald v. Chicago applied the Heller to state and local laws, not just federal, and it identified the right to bear arms as a privilege of citizenship. So that then went to our 14th Amendment, as well as our Second Amendment. And the Bruin decision relates to the New York Rifle and Pistol Club's lawsuit against the state of New York. Bruin was the state attorney general for New York. And what New York was being sued for is that a person who had a permit to carry wanted to be able to drive to his cabin and bring his gun. So that first decision, the New York State realized, oh, we got to get out of this one. We changed the law. So they allowed people, if you had a permit to carry, to go and still have it in your car to go to your other home. But it didn't extend that permit to carry as that you have a right to permit to carry. So the second lawsuit that went before the Supreme Court, and this one was not dropped, it was actually made a decision. They said that New York couldn't require that people had to prove that they had a need for a permit to carry. They said that that was a right, that, you know, if they could, in other words, if they asked for a permit to carry, they felt that New York, unless they had a reason to deny it, it should be given to that person. So like in Minnesota, there's a word called may issue or shall issue. Shall meaning that you have to do it, and may meaning you might. Well, New York was a may issue state, and now the Supreme Court is going to make them change their laws and to be a shall issue, like Minnesota became in 2003. Okay, I don't know if this makes it unclear to you. If I had a little bit about the ATF, and I just want to make it clear, ATF has been around for a long time. It didn't start after 1990. So I'm just curious, do you think having the bullets kind of made it a little more clear that that's separate than the than federal legislation since 1990? Let me know if you think I should take that and move it around on the slide, because I could do that. Anyway, back in the Whiskey Rebellion days, I mean, Congress in 1787 had authorized a unit to check out for illegal whiskey making. And it was actually 1934 when the National Firearms Act was passed that it became ATF. Before it used to be just alcohol and tobacco, and then they added firearms. And of course, after that, with issues in the 60s, it became explosives. And so it's still called ATF, but it includes all four of those categories. So the first law since 1990 was the Brady Act. But I did want to make it clear that the federal laws do preempt state laws. Brady Act was passed in 1993, and as I said, it required the background check, but left that loophole for unlicensed sellers. And then I just left one. And the Violent Crime Act banned the semi-automatic, the weapons, the assault rifles, and that expired in 2004, because it's hard to get that one even in there. And they only agreed to include it if there was a 10-year ban on it that would expire at the end of 10 years. And then, of course, the Protection of Lawful Commerce Act protects gun manufacturers from civil lawsuits. In other words, if somebody shoots a crowd of people, with this law, you can't sue the gun manufacturer for the assault weapon that was used because of this law. This law doesn't protect a gun manufacturer from a lawsuit if the gun was not properly manufactured. That's a different thing. If it is a poorly made thing that would always go off and be a threat to the gun owner. Minnesota legislation since 1990. And by the way, no Minnesota city can have regulations stronger than state laws. That became, it was called a preemption law that was effective in 1985. We do have several categories of persons that are prohibited from having guns. The most recent, and I think Minnesota is one of the few that actually includes stalkers, STALKERS. If a person is being stalked by somebody, they cannot have a gun. And then we have a child access prevention statute, which makes gun owners liable if there's a death or injury resulting from negligent storage. That was passed in 1993. I was asked in previous presentation, what's the penalty? Well, the penalty is it's a gross misdemeanor. So the penalty is you have up to 1 year in prison or a $3,000 fine, or up to $3,000 fine if you didn't follow that. But that's usually it's not a statute that can be enforced. It's usually enforced after the fact. It's because how do people know how anybody's storing anything unless there's an injury that occurs in that home? Permit to purchase is needed to buy a handgun or semi-automatic military style assault weapon. What makes Minnesota unique, even though according to gun groups that want to restrict firearms, they gave Minnesota a C+ for laws, but the laws we have are actually very effective. Requiring a permit to purchase means that you can't just get access to that assault weapon until you've passed a background check, and it takes 7 days for the police to give you a background, to complete their background checks. And by the way, because we're a shall issue state, the police only have 7 days to do the background check. They don't have any longer. And if they were inundated like they were during 2022, when we had a doubling and tripling of handgun and semi-automatic military style assault weapon permits to purchase, they were inundated, and they said in some cases they couldn't get to all of them. So they were automatically issued. Same thing for the permit to carries, where they have 30 days to come up with a reason to deny if that shows up. Otherwise, the person is issued that permit to carry. We have new technology, of course. Firearms more versatile, accurate, deadly, and less expensive. That used to keep people from buying firearms before. Interchangeable parts. We've got ghost guns that never existed back in 1990. You can even print them from 3D printing of them. And, as I said, you can buy these in kits without a background check. Okay. And then we get to our consensus topic questions. And what I like about this PowerPoint is that the White Bear Lake League Committee, they came up with the pros and cons. We had some of it in the report, but not as much as we probably should have for a good discussion. And you'll notice that the way the PowerPoint is set up, if you are doing a Zoom meeting, you can actually do a poll, because at the end, after you show the question, you're explaining what the extreme risk protection orders are. I'm just specifically for this one. And by the way, when it says family or law enforcement petition court to have firearms removed, there are several different groups that could petition depending on the state you are in. Some only allow law enforcement, some only allow law enforcement and the county attorney. And some allow families, some allow social workers, some allow school personnel. It just depends on how that legislation was written in that particular state. And it also, the reason that this is effective is it temporarily bans firearms possession and purchase. And the reason that you would issue an extreme risk protection order is to prevent a person who is going to be a danger to themselves or a danger to others from having a firearm during that time when they are in crisis of some sort, or when they're just so angry. In looking at states as they started to adopt this, Connecticut had a 17% drop in suicides over the next 5 years after they passed an extreme risk protection order law. 19 states currently have it. It's failed the last few years in Minnesota, but it has again been introduced in Minnesota. So we'll see how it goes through this year. And of course, the reasons must be approved by a judge with due process protections. I'm going to digress for a second. Before we are we're in our third iteration of the firearm study. We started out interviewing police and sheriffs, and from the interviews with them, they were very supportive of it as long as there were due process protections. And I should go back, and the Association of Minnesota Police Chiefs also, it's on their list of laws that they will be lobbying for as well. So it's not just, certain groups. So those are the pros. It is effective in preventing gun violence. Now, I want to mention one thing. I've been on these national calls about gun violence, and it appears that a lot of people don't even realize in their own state that they have that potential to petition a court for extreme risk protection orders for a family member or someone that is a threat to themselves or others. And And there are some states that have, I shouldn't say states, there are some counties that have been lobbied to say that they will not enforce any new gun laws such as extremist protection orders. And there were several counties in Colorado that signed on to it. And yet half of those same counties that said that they would never enforce an ERPO, half of them are enforcing it because they are effective at preventing suicides especially. And the cons, it's, you know, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, because your firearms would be removed temporarily while this order was in effect. And the Fifth Amendment, right to due process. Well, as long as it's going through the court, they do have due process. And you'll notice at the end there, it gives the question again, and at that point you could actually do the polling result. For those of you, some of your groups might have already, well, I know Wes's group have done it, and I'm assuming that they might have done the polling result, and it shows everybody then, right then and there, the percentages from their meeting, who voted yes, not who voted yes, but the percentage who voted yes, percentage who voted no, and the percentage that abstained on that question. So again, the second consensus question, I'm just better check on my time here. Before I go further, are there any questions? Any questions at all? Just let's see if I see it on the chat. Yes, Mary Broad said, I believe a stalker cannot have a gun. That is correct. That a person who is being stalked cannot have a gun. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, Lynn. No, the stalker is the one who cannot have a gun. The one who is, you know, peeping around the window and following somebody to work every day and all that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And in fact, sometimes there are some cases where, and here another question, what gun rights do non-citizens have? They do not have a right to a firearm unless they have a legal residence in Minnesota, or a legal residence. Yeah, I'm talking about Minnesota, but nationally you have to, that's a national thing. Non-citizens cannot possess a firearm unless they have, are legally here with a permit to live and work here. All right, I think I've answered those. So yeah, feel free to ask questions as we go along here. You know, when we were doing this study, I was getting frustrated because I thought, you know, we could have as many laws as we want, and it's not going to have any impact on the homicides that we were seeing. The homicides were appearing almost in certain limited areas within the metro area. And it was a surprise to me when I'd see that over 90% of the cities had no homicides. So when you started looking at it, I started seeing that there's a belief that it's almost like viewing if you look at it from a community health point, you can see that there is like a virus, this firearm use to deal with disputes or disrespect. And that if there's a way that you can start focusing on those particular social networks, you can make a huge difference in the homicide rate. And so that's where I really felt we needed this as a consensus question. And when we did our first iteration of this, it was not allowed because it was considered to be beyond the purview of updating our firearms thing. So this is one that I really felt strongly about seeing as an option for league members to vote on. Currently, the national government has been giving money out for this purpose, but it's only reaching about like 35 large cities in the country. They're giving it to the cities with the highest gun violence, and Minneapolis isn't there. So, you know, we have other sources that I think Minneapolis is getting the money from. And let's see here. there's different types of community violence intervention. And of course, it's always best having people who are community people. You just don't send somebody from another state to think that they will be able to have an impact within that community. So you want people from that community, hopefully, that can work to create some social pressure to change how people respond to disputes. So you have the street social workers or street outreach workers, and then there's groups that will also want to support and give training to help reduce violence, gun violence, through, it might be social workers, it might be therapists, it might just be, and sometimes it might be the police who are doing that. It just depends on where you're at. And they provide social services. And of course, one of the best ways is the hospital-based appeals to victims and families to lessen retaliation. So, because you'll notice if you're looking at the news, you'll see where there's a shooting. And then you'll see that there's another shooting and the next day. And then you'll say, oh, and then there's another one the next day. And you just kind of know that there is some link between some of those. And I'm not saying in all cases, but it's retaliation. So that's what's positive about the hospital-based appeals. When somebody comes in with gunshot wounds or has been killed, if you can work with the family to help them not respond in kind with shooting the other person back, but to, lessen that retaliation. Any questions on that? Yeah, Minnesota is already using this with some mixed results. The leader of the Office of Violence Prevention was, I think her last name was Cotton, and Shana Cotton, I think, but she left. And so we have a new person who's in charge. So he came in July. So it takes a while to get things working right. Brooklyn Park instituted a gun intervention violence, and they were finding immediately that there were fewer calls to the police. These workers were working in a couple of the apartment buildings that had extremely high rates of phone calls to the police to come up and break fights, or that somebody was being shot. So it did have an impact. Did it help 100%? No, because then there was a problem with some gun violence and retaliations that weren't getting addressed. And Minneapolis, though, had fewer homicides last year using several programs. Seems hard to believe, but yes, it was less than it was the year before of gun deaths and shootings. The reason that this is a positive thing is that Minnesota would benefit from evidence-based research on effective CVI. From what I've read, also beyond the hospital-based ones are ones that have a police part of it, as they can it's the carrot and the stick kind of thing, because the police can say, this is what's going to happen if you get involved in retaliation. And this is, they can kind of lay it out very clearly to the person and families. And then police would have support from other social service groups, because that's also, the police alone can't do it. You need social service groups that the community can trust, because you need trust to kind of make an inroad into ending violence. The con is it's additional funding needed. So you can just see that, once things start, there's a budget crunch, this would be one of the first ones that gets cut. And they do have high costs up front to provide that support and training and to get the right people on. And here's a con determining which approach to use, CVI or law enforcement. Actually, you can do both. It can be both of them. The one thing, law enforcement is usually higher paid, so that does bring a cost. And again, this could be your polling question. And then you have your questions on the question 3. I'll probably go quicker on these because there's not as, this is so clearly the restricting of firearms in the state capitol building. That's to, because the joke is you can't bring a sign in because if you threw it down into the floor, somebody could get there, it could get injured, or if it had a stick, but you can bring a gun in. So the question is, does this chill free speech when you have people debating a highly controversial legislation? Some states don't allow for open carrying of firearms in their capital because it can chill debate. That's clear. Minnesota, when you have a permit to carry, that is actually allows open as well as concealed, because Minnesota didn't want to see people getting charged because someone happened to see that their firearm was visible, on strapped on their chest or something if they had their suit coat open. So yeah, it's both. The thing is, Minnesota allows us the permit to carry a firearm to carry it in any public space that is not a restricted government building. So if Minnesota choose, they could restrict guns in the Capitol. That by Minnesota law allows that, just like Minnesota allows schools to prohibit firearms. Minnesota law does not intervene with private businesses. Private businesses can have a sign saying no firearms allowed. But right now, like if you go to a state park, you cannot bring let's say the state had a DNR building that said you can't bring a firearm in, they have a right to do that, but they can't restrict that gun in the park public space, when people are walking outside. So that was a detail that I learned on this. And that's, obviously the pro and the cons, and you might think of more pros and cons as we go through these, and then you'd have the question for your members. Next one is adopting stronger safe storage laws. That was one that we currently are considered better than most states, because at least we have a penalty if it's found that the firearms are not secured. If there's a person under 18 in the house, they could reasonably find it. Only 6 states require safe storage that requires owners to store firearms in specified ways. And those ways could be that they have to be storing the gun separately from the ammunition, or it could be that they have trigger locks on them. There's a wide variety of how states might write a law. So it can prevent suicides and homicides, because young people can get pretty despondent. They haven't lived a long life to know that life has its ups and downs. And the thing with the gun is it can be, those are when people can have an impulse to for suicide, and if they have a gun handy, that means they're probably most likely going to kill themselves. Whereas if it's drugs or something else that takes time to be effective, somebody can intervene, get their stomach pumped out, or make sure that they don't have ropes and things like that, and plastic bags where they could asphyxiate themselves. And of course, this is the con. Either way, these are actually enforced after the fact. So let's see, I see there's a couple of questions. Let's see what they are. Okay, somebody says, according to Representative Brand, many legislators carry guns in the Capitol. Okay, and would no guns at the Capitol mean legislators could not carry? Could that be an exception? Both of those are, I'll address Jean's question. That's something the legislators would really probably have to do some compromising on. Or they could say, it has to be, your gun has to be locked in a certain area in the in your office, or at least if they needed to, if they were feeling unsafe, that they would provide some kind of security for them. So what constitutes secured? Secured is that your firearm, if you're talking about negligent storage, the one that we currently have, it just means that it's stored in a spot where a child could not access it. So maybe it is a gun safe that you have, but you want to make sure the child does not know the code. Or maybe it is in a locked area, but it is, it just means that if a child got it, that they would not be able to shoot off the gun to hurt themselves or someone else. And if it's secured with safe storage versus negligent, then there's probably going to be more active ways in which they would expect a gun to be secured. And that again would be based on legislation. Here's what, do we know what percentage of people or households do not possess a firearm? Currently, it looks like there's 40% of households possess a firearm, which is down from what it was in the 50s. Okay, so I think I've answered those, but if you can think if there's anything that you thought, did she say that right? Double check me, I'm getting older. You can, I might have said it wrong, but just if you have a question, please let me know. This next one is one that kind of brought a lot more conversation, shall I say, to our committee. Should Minnesota add those on the terror watch list to the prohibited purchaser category? Oh, and let me backtrack again. One of the police officers that we interviewed said that negligent storage was the hardest statute to enforce because you can't go into people's homes to check. That's just not something you can do. We have privacy in the home, and it's only if there's been a shooting in the house that they come to the door to, you know, deal with that emergency response, that they can see, oh, you know, when investigations might prove that actually that gun had been just left under dad's pillow or something. And before I begin in on this one, the terror watch list is not the same as the no-fly list. So there's a difference between those two. Did I? Yeah, okay. So the pros on this, the FBI director said that their domestic terrorism caseloads exploded and poses a greatest threat to national security. That was in 2021. And those on the terror watch list are free to buy and own unlimited firearms in the United States. And a large percentage of individuals on the watch list have cleared background checks and received approval to buy. Minnesota has 11 statewide hate groups, 3 terror incidents tied to militia movements in Minnesota. I believe Minnesota has 3 militia groups that are considered hate groups. And there's nothing to prevent any of them who have not committed a crime from possessing a background or possessing a firearm. The question is, has this group threatened to commit some kind of mass shooting or some other thing like that? I don't know. And then the con, of course, be a violation of the Second Amendment right to own guns, violation of the Fifth Amendment due to due process. Those on the terrorist watch list have no opportunity to contest their inclusion in court. It could be guilt by association. The list is secret. There's could be unfair profiling of religious, racial, or other ethnic groups. And the terror watch list may have multiple errors. I was talking to Mary Lou Scrow. This was the one that she had written, and she felt that they could go to a court about this. From what we don't know that that's true, but it is something that it is a very large watch list. So here's another one. Requiring state licensing of firearm dealers. Right now, there's no requirement for firearm dealers to get a state license. They have to have a federal firearm license. And if you read the full report, there are more firearm dealers in the United States than there are McDonald's. And we know how many McDonald's there are. The ATF does not have the ability to actually go and inspect all these different firearm dealers. And in fact, there's a law that you cannot be inspected more than once a year. But the reality is that most don't even get inspected once every 5 years. maybe once every 10 years. Some have not even been inspected for 20 years. But we were trying to look at where is it that there could be some kind of loose area, some kind of donut hole that where people are getting firearms. If you have a rogue firearm dealer that is getting, they get their firearms from the manufacturers, so they're getting it at wholesale, and the prices are, they can then, would they traffic in them? There have been some dealers that have been found to traffic in these firearms, and Minnesota, in looking at the data and how they determine whether you have a problem with the honesty of your firearm dealers, is if guns that are leaving the manufacturers and going to the FFLs, the federal firearm dealers, how quickly they appear as a gun used in a crime by the FBI. So Minnesota has a fairly good track record, and it's not perfect, but it's better than some states that really should do state licensing of firearm dealers. So we do not have a state licensing system. This is a little bit of the background you would have found in the report. It does mandate certain security measures for places of business selling firearms. This also makes us stand out from other states, because when they have that in big bold letters about that, they have the thing up there about it's against the law to not secure your firearms if you have anyone under 18 in your house, and to protect the children. Those things make a difference. And in fact, Minnesota's accidental shooting killing rate with children went down after this law was passed, to have that, just to remind people. A lot of times public education is very important. So 9 states and Washington, D.C. require licensing of firearm dealers, and 7 more states require state licenses for the sale of handguns and certain kinds of firearms. Let's see. So we've got a penalty, though, of $250,000 if you are dealing without a license, but I don't know how many cases they've been able to prosecute on that. And the federal license is needed to deal firearms with, if you are dealing in firearms with a profit motive, you have to have a federal license. People who are sometimes just doing the trading of old curios, old firearms, from Revolutionary War times and such, do not need that. But if it's a curio with a automatic machine gun, that they have to have a special license for that. State licensing, the pros, of course: stricter certification, routine inspections, accountability for the inventory, background checks for all employees, because if you may be an honest dealer, but if you have an employee in your shop who couldn't even pass a background check, that might be where people are illegally getting their guns, is from that employee that you hired. Security measures such as surveillance cameras, safe storage, and alarm systems could be enforced. Right now, they're not enforced. So at least if you have your local police just being able to go by and see, hey, your surveillance camera, is it working? Have you locked up your firearms when you close shop at night? Is your alarm system working? That's the kind of things where it could make a difference. The con is more case costs for state to administer, more costs for dealers to pay a license fee for both places, and there might still be ways to get around the law. Firearm violence research. This was one that some had some questions about it. Public policy needs to be based on research. There was a Dickey Amendment passed in the legislature that basically chilled gun research for 23 years, leaving a void in research. And the reason for that is that they said that there could be no gun research used to lobby to restrict firearms in any way. So a lot of researchers just thought they didn't want to risk losing their ability to receive grants as an institution. So they just stopped doing it. Then in 2019, they were given the go ahead to do research, but it's again not for the purpose. They clarified it that this wouldn't be a penalty against them. It's just that they couldn't do that, getting involved in lobbying. More research would help understand the root causes of potential solutions to gun violence. It also could help support research to develop evidence-based solutions to gun violence epidemic. So, in this case, I think that last one kind of rings true for me, is that once there has been some violence, how do you stop it? How do you interrupt it? And what's effective? Because we really haven't had as much data on the effectiveness. We have it on some cities, but it's not very many. And of course, the pros gives you an adequate, it would give you more of a database to see how you could reduce gun violence. And locally collected data would aid public policy decisions. And local level is better for collecting data. And the Minnesota could develop a rich database. Con is research is costly, and some say, better done at the federal level. And I'll get to the last question. Any questions at all on this so far? Okay, then I'll get to the last question, because this is the one that gets this can have a lot of discussion because there hasn't been a lot of research on stand your ground laws and the impact of them. But what research there has been, well, first let me explain what the stand your ground laws are. You do not have a duty to retreat from the situation before resorting to deadly force. So you're not limited to your home or place of work that you can have a gun. You can be out there at the parking lot, upset that somebody took your parking spot. And if that person, if you start threatening them and then they get mad and jump on you and try to get your gun away and you shoot them, well, you just stood your ground because you use your gun to protect yourself because you were feeling threatened. Or if the person, came up to you and was looking like they were going to punch you, you could use your gun. Right now in Minnesota, due to, again, some more recent cases and some judicial rulings, a man's home is his castle. So you do not have a duty to retreat before using deadly force if you're in your home or yard. But we do have a duty to retreat from a threatening situation if we can do so with complete safety. And outside of our homes, it means if we don't have a stand your ground law, it means if we can safely retreat, we are required to. If you think of the case of Trayvon Martin in Florida, he was an unarmed young Black male who was being followed by a man named Zimmerman, who was viewing himself as kind of the, sheriff of his housing area. And he was following Trayvon, and he called the police, and the police were telling him, do not follow him. We can send a car out there, but no, he kept following him. And Trayvon got scared, and he then came back and, jumped on him to keep him away from him. And then Zimmerman felt his gun was going to be taken away by Trayvon Martin. And so he shot him. But if he had just followed what the police were saying, and that is retreat, do not follow him, we'll send a car out, Trayvon Martin would have still been alive. 38 states, though, have stand your ground laws. What's been confusing in doing research is we've had an increase in gun violence, and states that have stand your ground laws have had actually an greater increase in gun violence since instituting those laws. So the question is, are these cases where that they really were threatened and that they saved themselves from getting shot? The cases that I've seen in Minnesota where there is defensive gun use, it's basically with people that have some kind of long-standing disputes, or they're involved in some criminal drug trade or something where they know that someone's going to be doing a home invasion and they're ready to shoot them, or they're ready to shoot them outside a funeral of one of the gang members, you might say. They're ready to shoot at the others. So those were the only cases of defensive gun use I found in Minnesota 2 years ago. And then last year there was a case where somebody pointed his gun to stop a carjacking, I'm sorry, and it was effective, but he did not pull the trigger. He had a permit to carry and he was being responsible, but he did save the woman's life because they then got out of the car and stopped it so that the woman would not get dragged by the car. That is kind of what we have there to show where it is. And you can see that the states that are in that blue color, they are the states actually who have a pretty low firearm death rate, except for Maryland there, which does have a higher one. And Maryland also has a lot of laws, and yet they still have a higher death rate than other states. So these would be the reasons for it. Now, the thing that gets confusing when you're going to be asked the question, you're going to be, if you say yes, you're saying yes to opposing stand your ground laws. And if you're saying no, you're saying no, we should not oppose stand your ground laws. Sorry that it's a confusing question, but one of the strongest personalities on the committee wanted it this way. It was clearly opposed stand your ground laws. So that's how it got worded that way. So I'm just looking at our time here and I've gone over a little bit. Is there, should we talk a little bit about that? I mean, the RAND.org, they are a nonpartisan organization that does a lot of research and is very good. And it was really through their research that I was seeing that stand your ground laws can actually impact negatively African-American, especially African-American males, because when a case comes of a person killed, if it's the Black person shooting the white person, it's questioned as to whether that was truly a stand your ground or whether that had actually been an aggressive, criminal thing. And if they would be more likely to assume the white person was standing their ground. Truly, they were trying to defend themselves. So there is some racism and how that has been implemented. Just thought I'd throw that in there because that is something that it hadn't crossed my mind until I read that. I thought, oh, and then obviously I should say obviously, because I'll let you discuss that one because I have my opinions and I should probably keep them to myself. Let me see if there's another question. What's the threshold for achieving consensus? Oh, Charlotte, I wish you hadn't asked that one, but at the same time, let me address it because that was very frustrating for me when I first learned about consensus. We were having to deal with a consensus meeting on domestic family violence. And it was a state league study. And I kept asking the state league president, well, what percentage is consensus? She said, consensus is when you come to some agreement. I said, well, give me a number. And finally, after many, many times, she finally said 80%. I said, oh, okay. I just needed to have a number. And then for this league thing, though, let's say we only had like 5 leagues respond, and maybe they had strong support. I don't think that would be consensus. Consensus is when you can get as many as 100% of leagues would be wonderful. But if we can get at the minimum 80% of state leagues at least participating, then we can get consensus. So that's kind of where I'm at. Any other questions? I think I'm going to have to go back to share screen because there's a slide I have to show you real quickly. Oops, let me see here. Okay. Thank you for your participation, and you'll look for a survey in your email. Help us learn how we can improve our January Jumpstart and future training opportunities. So your survey will provide an opt-out if you do not want your contact information shared with other local league leaders. We would like to share names, email addresses, and phone numbers of fellow league leaders only to help with ongoing networking. So that is the final slide. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, or if you would like some assistance, if you're doing a presentation, let me know. We've got committee members that are more than happy to help you. So, and then please get your response forms into me. We're starting to, get all that tallied up so that when we get to February 17th, we'll have as much information as we can get. So can Anne Flynn, our Whitley, oh, I think she just disappeared because I was going to try to call her. I was trying to think of the leagues that I have there's 12 leagues that have not made any contact about this. So this is why I was trying to reach them. Any other questions? I see you're all mute. You can all unmute if you wish, if you had any other questions. Oh, I'll stop the recording.